Think I'm online now? Question mark. I don't think anyone's watching right now, which is totally fine. You guys, if you do start watching, you guys can go back and watch stuff. Um, let's go to. There we go. All right. So finished on religious stuff. I'm gonna go Ethelwood. So it seems like they both cover everything, but like in a different order. And right now we're gonna talk about colonialism. So, although actually Ethelwood only has specific stuff, it doesn't have everything. The other one has more stuff, but I prefer the way that Ethelwood does it. So for the stuff that Ethelwood has, I'm gonna look at this one, and stuff that doesn't, look at this one. Okay. So, because it goes straight from Renaissance straight into Reformation. Oh, it does mention what's going on in the other parts. So let's go back. We're going way back. We're going back to 1400. All right. So let's go to 1460. This is when we talk about France's ancien regime and all that right stuff, shit. So after the Hundred Years' War, they finally kicked them out. France was really weak. All right. And it actually had a bunch of nobles, and the picture that I was using before had it. France in 1444. Let's do that. So, you guys can see this, right? Yes. So let me make this bigger. See, so you see this, the big blue blob here. This is all France, right? But see all these little colors here? These are all different noble kingdoms, okay, right? They're technically under France. This is in 1477. This is when Louis XIV is starting to do a thing, right? So especially here, this is Burgundy. This is all in French, so this is why the stuff is weird. So this, Burgundy is the most independent. All the other ones, they are part of France. They're for sure part of France, okay? Anjou, Maine, Le Marche, whatever these things are. But they're ruled by powerful nobles, okay? They technically pay fealty to the king, but especially after the war, the Hundred Years' War, they're not that. They're pretty independent. They're not enough to be like their own state, obviously, but they can create their own laws, and they don't always have to do what the king asks. So, stuff like the Fronde happens, and realpolitik and all of that. So starting before Louis. Oh shit! I was looking at the wrong thing. So they're pretty weak right now. And Louis the 11th is what I'm talking about. The first one of the Valois family, first Louis, okay, that actually became pretty important. The first, they won the Hundred Years' War, kicking out England, right? As you can see, for the most part, but it took forever. Burgundy was, they were part of the French royal house, but they acted as their own independent kingdom, and they acquired land in the Netherlands. Let's go 10 years back. No. Where is it? See, you can see here. See how these are lined? This is because they are technically part of France, right? But because of they're actually kind of traitors. They're acting independently. They have bits they've conquered on their own, so they're kind of in rebellion in a way. France recovers most of this when Louis XI seizes larger pieces of them and basically he just takes it back when some of their kings died. Um, yeah, Louis XIV doesn't have it for a while. See, I saw a Louis with an X next to it, and I automatically assumed it was Louis XIV. I was very wrong, which is fine. I didn't really go over it. And so during this, so mid 15th century in the 1450s, all right, the Iberian Peninsula is divided into Castile and Aragon, with a couple other things of Granada and Portugal, as well as Navarre. Navarre is actually right over here. It's this section. I know it's part of Aragon, but like a couple years before, it was its own nation. Okay, so they were all Christian except for Granada. Granada is actually the last hold of Islam in Europe, except for Ottomans, obviously, but in Western Europe. So if you remember, a couple hundred years before, this whole area was all Islamic. It was all Umayyads and stuff like that. The Caliphate of Cordoba, right? But over a couple hundred years, these were pushed back until the only remnant of this Islamic Empire is Granada, right here. So, and it's pretty defensible. There's a lot of mountains and fortresses there, which is why it survived so long next to these gigantic nations, as well as that it's next to Marinid, also known as Morocco, and this other place that they defended basically. So the Christian kingdoms in this area, so from way before, began the Reconquista, which is what this was. They reconquered this all of the Iberian Peninsula. They reconquered Spain in the name of Christianity. So this was the vibe that Isabella, the Queen of Castile, she married in 1469 to Ferdinand, who was going to be the king of Sicily and heir to the throne of Aragon. Right? He was king of Aragon, queen of Castile. They married to create Spain. Okay. The nobles in Castile opposed the marriage because it would increase royal power. Obviously, because they're uniting a bunch of countries, the royals are going to be much more powerful than the nobles. The nobles did a 10-year civil war, but Isabel and Ferdinand emerged victorious, and they created the Kingdom of Spain in 1474. So, Spain, see? So, to get more authority, they filled the political bureaucracy with hidalgos, which were lesser aristocrats. So instead of having the big strong families, they can stay just as big strong families, and then the little ones, they're now in debt to Ferdinand and Isabella, the king and queen, because they are given positions in the bureaucracy. So these lesser ones, they don't have a lot of political pull, right? They're given power, right? Instead of giving it to the bigger nobles, because they could abuse that power. I don't know who's watching right now, but I appreciate you. Just making sure that things as it goes. What else? So, and then during this is when colonialism starts to happen. And let me switch to a page that talks about it. Way later. Please hold. Actually, I thought it was probably better. The thing is just organized differently. It wasn't organized in the way I wanted it to, so. Okay. So let's talk about colonialism, alright? And then we're going to go back. Wait, let's just talk about Spain, specifically, alright? Or the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, and then we're going to talk about the other countries in a little bit, alright? See, the thing is, when you talk about history, especially when you're going in depth like we are here, it's so difficult to talk about everything at the same time. You can't just look at. Okay, so there's different ways to organize it. You can either go to the history of each country or each couple countries. Like you could talk about the Holy Roman Empire altogether. It'd be very easy. Or France, or England, or Spain. But it's hard to talk about all of them at the same time without specific talking about one thing that they're doing at the same time. So you could talk about the Reformation in relation to all of them, or colonialism and Reformation in relation to all of them, or whatever, right? But you can't talk about what's happening in the late 1400s without jumping all over the place 24/7, and that's really difficult to do, which is why it's broken up either into countries or subject, right? So the easiest what I'm going to do is do a little bit of both. But first, let's specifically go Spain a little bit. So they did Reconquista, they did the marriage. Spain's a thing. Let me find where I was. They also had an Inquisition, right? In the context of the Reformation. Almost here. Actually, no, before the Reformation. So after the Civil War ended and they created Spain, they took up the cause of Reconquista to drive the Muslims from southern Castile. So not only, so from their own country, they started making Muslims and Jews leave the country. That was the Inquisition, right? The Spanish Inquisition. You know the one. um, and forcing them out or forcibly converting them to Christianity. So finally, they warred against Granada, and you can see it shrink between 1490, which it actually fell in 1492. Yeah, see, it's gone. It's dead. Dead country. And so they finally drove all of the Muslims out of Spain. So Navarre's back, as you can see. He got freed for whatever reason. And this is where the idea of heretics and stuff like that happens. In 1502, all Muslims who had not accepted Christianity were expelled from the country, and the persecution of all non-Christians, as well as Christians judged to be heretics, fostered a religious unity that enhanced the political centralization that Ferdinand and Isabel had achieved. So not only did they attack all the so because everyone was Catholic and they were clearly great Catholics, they were defending the faith, by getting all these Muslims out. All the Catholics loved them. They grew in power. Okay, so if we talk about colonialism, which I'll actually move on to it this time. So the idea of capitalism starts to be a thing. Not necessarily capitalism in itself, but free trade and joint stock company and just capital. The idea that you invest in stuff. Capitalism is later explained by Adam Smith, but this is later. Okay, not right now. With his Wealth of Nations and stuff like that. Again, later. So during this, there's a commercial revolution. New systems of bookkeeping, banking, merchandising, and investing characterize these changes, with the development of capitalism and mercantilism being most influential. So volume of trade rises. Venice and Florence become less important because trade expands to west, and then when they get colonies, they cease being much of a power at all. They're still rich, but like the entire country of Spain or France is way richer. The Italian city-states are the richest city-states, and they're probably the richest in comparison to their size, right? But it's kind of hard to pretend that Venice, this tiny little country over here, is anywhere near the power of Spain or France, especially when you look at all their colonial holdings, which they don't have right at the second, but they're about to. There's a bunch of explorers, right? That they explore because of the technological advances with the map making, like Mercator projection, so they can actually see. It's just map making done better, so they can actually see where they're going. And lots of oversea sea technology, like the Caravel and Astrolabe and stuff like that. So the first time that it really starts picking up in exploration, where they start looking outward, right? Portugal has this king called Henry the Navigator, Prince Henry. Henry the Navigator. He's he likes reading about stuff outside of the country. And hold on.
Live stream.
My brother's here. It's really.
He's got stream snipe, boy. Who's on it?
Just like one person. I don't know who, but it's just one. But like I'm trying to do something here.
Wait, if it says one, then that's yourself.
No.
That's how.
It was 0 before.
Twitch person.
All right. Bye.
I just stream sniped you.
You're really boring.
Boring. That person thinks it's fun.
It's hilarious. Sorry about that. So Henry the Navigator, he cares about outside of Europe. Okay. And so he establishes a school, which I don't know if it's said somewhere, but he creates a navigation school, which a bunch of cartographers and explorers and sailors that are familiar with Arab maps and stuff, they go there to teach and stuff like that. And so because of that, and including technology like the magnetic compass, astrolabe, caravel, they start expanding, right? And the reason that they're expanding, all right, is because they want to get access to the trade over here, right? They want all these spices here. So they want to get access to the Indian Ocean trade, okay? Which is now difficult because of the strength of the Ottoman Empire and the Mamluks, right? They're kind of blocking of trade for the Europeans. And because religions hate each other, it's kind of hard for a Christian to go there. It's not as bad as it seems like it should be, but it's not easy. So the Portuguese start going down here. They send explorers like Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Diaz, and Pedro Cabal Oops, not Pedro Cabal. But they go south. They establish a bunch of little forts all around here. And the forts are essentially places for trading ships from Portugal to dock, get new supplies, and continue on. Because otherwise, they have to land in the middle of a forest and stuff like that, and it's kind of dangerous, especially with tribes and stuff like that that don't like the invaders. They also conquer a couple kingdoms, take a little bites out of kingdoms. I don't know really where. I don't think they're sure. Oh yeah, here. So you see these little red bits: Luanda, Zanzibar, Mozambique. Those are conquered by Portugal, and it's literally just so that they can get rest stops essentially, and so they continue on and they get all this trade over here, and it looks like by 1580 they had Makassar, this little place over here. Essentially, all of this is just to get the spice trade, right? So then 1492, you know what happens. Columbus sails Ocean Blue. So he lands here. He thinks this is Japan. You should look at the history of the world thing by, the guy that did History of Japan. Christopher Columbus goes there. He's kind of an asshole, and he's Portuguese, or actually, yeah, he's Genoese. Actually, he's from Genoa, or Genoese. I don't know how to pronounce it. But he goes to Portugal. They say no. He goes to Spain. They say no a couple times until they say yes. And he goes. And he thought the world's a lot smaller. You know the whole story. I don't know how I'm going over it. But they go there and start establishing colonies. See, by 1500, they already have one for Hispaniola. So what's important to note is that Spain actually in 1500, an explorer came here. He got lost off of the course of Africa here. His name was Pedro Cabral, and he sailed too far west and he landed here and claimed this Brazil for Portugal. All right. So this is the only section that Portugal actually gets in the New World, and this is because of that one explorer. And the reason that they actually end up agreeing, right, Spain and Portuguese not fighting over this, is the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? So Portugal and Spain were pretty good allies and stuff. They didn't fight often, otherwise Portugal would have totally got their ass kicked. They began to argue because different explorers, they were like, who deserves this? Which is weird, but whatever. So they talked to the Pope, and the Pope was Spanish actually. So he, hold on, I'm trying to. So the Spanish-born Pope Alexander VI, he endorsed an imaginary line drawn through the Atlantic as the boundary for Spanish claims, which allows Spain to get all of the West, right? And this basically, it was like right here, right? So basically, Brazil or Portuguese would basically just get the tip here, and that was really not fair. So the Portuguese king protested, said he wasn't going to accept it, and so they decided to do it 100 leagues west of it. So it's basically like right here-ish, okay? And this basically meant that they could agree to not fight over it. Um, Portugal, they basically only paid attention to Brazil over here, and then their African and Indonesian colonies, while Spain was completely focused on the New World. And over time, they conquered a ton of shit. Eventually, actually conquering part of Brazil. I don't know when that happened, but apparently it did. Wait, what the fuck? When the fuck did Spain take over Portugal? What the fuck? Right, I guess I gotta learn some more history, I guess. When the fuck did that happen? Whatever. That's fine. That's fine. This is totally just fine and dandy. Portugal doesn't fucking exist. Whatever. I don't even care. Whatever. Um so there's other explorers going around. Amerigo, whatever. I think it's Amerigo Vespucci, right? Some de la Casas, whatever. They explore more of America. Ferdinand Magellan goes around the world. He was commissioned by Spain, and stuff like that. I mean, you don't have to know their names. Basically, there's a bunch of explorers. It goes all around the world, around the world, around the world. Anyway, Hernan Cortez conquers the Aztecs. Um, Cortez conquers. He uses the other tribes to basically overthrow them. Um, who was it? Pizarro finds the Incas, which are then conquered by. Oh, Pizarro conquers the Inca. That doesn't sound right, but okay. That was some other guy. Never mind. So yeah, Cortez conquered the Aztecs in 1532. Here you go. 1530. See New Spain. You have to remember that like this is like super depopulated. There's like no one living here. All right, it's like a single missionary in like the middle of nowhere with his like tribe or whatever. But it's technically under them. And then very soon after, Incas are conquered, as you can see. And they're expanding extremely fast, obviously, right? And this is mostly because there was stuff to already conquer there. And since they have a good base to start off of, and they use the encomiendas, and they get rich off of gold, Spain's very powerful, and they can send a lot more colonists, expand a lot faster. But after they reach a certain point, they still expand, but it's not as rapid as before, as you can see. And it's more focused, but still pretty shallow. The northern colonies that don't happen yet; they happen later with America, stuff like that. They're very developed, right? Because they're not just focused on resource extraction. Um, they yeah, looking stuff they use. Oh yeah, in New Spain and stuff like that, it was very they were based on the caste system, the castas. They were based off of race and who your parents were and who their parents were and stuff like that. You know about that, but people who part African, part European were called mulattoes, and the people half European, half Amerindian were called mestizos, and all the other combinations didn't really matter. So people in the old world, people born in Spain, are peninsulares. You can remember that because of the Iberian Peninsula. And people born in the New World were Creoles. And these were white people, alright? So just remember, white people are Creoles. Okay? Um, which is weird. Whatever. In other parts of the world, and this is, I think, this is actually, I don't even know. I'm trying to remember. I always refer to Louis XIV because he's very iconic in my mind. But like I don't even know what context he's in. I guess okay. If you're gonna remember when Louis XIV happens, let's look at how. I'm assuming there was two Louis in between Louis XIV and Louis XVI. Louis XVI is a revolution, right? And so if you give each king about 50 years of reign, because they come in when they're a little bit older usually, because their parents die, like if they live longer, stuff like that. So that's about like 100 years ish, 150 maybe. So the French Revolution happens in 1700s or late 1700s because it's in relation to American, and you can go back and it's in the 1600s that Louis XIV happens. I think, pretty sure. Um, yeah. Anyway, colonialism by other countries, which I'll now pay attention to. So there's this important idea of the Protestant work ethic. It's this kind of a fallacy. It's not entirely true, but it's the idea that Christian Protestants work harder than any other like religious group, and this is not only present in during the Reformation and afterwards, but it goes on even today actually, and very recently. In the I used it in my A push essay. I'm pretty sure last year. But the whole idea that they go and they work harder, they don't take handouts, and God doesn't help them too much and stuff like that. That is their whole shtick. So Protestant work ethic, they all think that it's what the American dream is kind of based off of. Is that if you work hard, you will succeed, right? God will reward you for all your hard work. So I know I'm going way too long on this, but yeah, Protestant work ethic. Remember that because it's useful anytime you're talking about Protestants. Um, So the Dutch and the French and British, they organized joint stock companies to share the risk of business. The Dutch East India Company was one of the biggest, and then the British East India Company was also pretty huge. West Indian, I don't know which one is which, but they started trading with the West East Indies, which is over here. Skip 100 years forward. So as you can see, all these little orange bits, NI, 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 and L. I don't know. I don't know what those. I don't know what it stands for, but orange means it's the Netherlands. I guess that's what NL means. Spain is also here, but they didn't really concentrate on it, and they only like. I mean, they didn't do anything with this. And this is when Portugal doesn't exist, because or it does exist. Whatever. Portugal's just a thing. Just ignore when it does and doesn't exist. Just forget about it. All right. Um, So the Netherlands, they're very strong in the Indies. In fact, you can see this place. They also had a bite of India as well, which apparently was part of the Mughals. That seems not right. So 1700s, obviously, we have the 13 colonies and stuff are going. Florida is owned by Spain. French are they colonized starting north in Quebec, right? Because you can remember that because Quebec is the French bit, and then the rest is all British, and that's because they didn't colonize all the rest until Britain took it over. And so they own this line along the Mississippi here because New Orleans is very strong, all right? So they started in the Great Lakes and they actually went down south. Started in Great Lakes, got like halfway through here, and then they got the New Orleans and they spread upwards and connected it. I'm not entirely sure if that's the actual thing, but like that's the idea anyway. And they did this so they could do trade and fur stuff like this, and send it all the way down here, and then send it down these trade routes through the Caribbean and stuff like that, um, back to Europe. And you know all about the triangular trade and all stuff like that. I don't have to go over it. I mean I'm not going to do it for myself, so whatever. But they get slaves from here. They get it these these kingdoms over here that raid other tribes around, and then they sell to the Europeans who go work here and they sell stuff here, and then they bring the resources to Europe, creates finished goods, send them back, blah 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 blah. What else? New York is originally New Amsterdam, which is Dutch, but then the Dutch just gave up on the New World and they started doing stuff in the East instead. Jamestown's a thing. They use indentured servants. You know, a push. I don't have to go over America. Columbian Exchange. Um, Social changes. Don't care about that. There's also a little ice age between 1600 and 1850, but like doesn't matter at all. Shouldn't anyway. I don't it led to colder weather meant lower crop yields, which in turn led to increased famine and greater susceptibility to disease. So basically, this time was extra shitty. Um, During the 16th century, which is actually 1500s, um, they called them the gentry. Bourgeois became an idea. The gentry are a class of wealthy, educated, and socially ambitious families in urban and rural areas of Western Europe. So they profit from expanded production and trade and from a rise in the value of land. So they're not necessarily nobles, but they're kind of important. Okay. Stuff for women still sucks. We're back to witch hunts. Balance of power. Yeah. So between 1550 and 1648, this is when we start seeing the drop in Spanish power, right? This is when there's. I don't even know. It's so hard to actually find all this stuff. They're very powerful in the New World, right? But like the New World kind of sucks. All it's got is like these rocks, gold and silver, gold and stuff like that. But like there's not tons of people there. There's tons of slaves, and all the food that they're growing isn't stuff you can eat. It's like sugar, right? It's cash crops. So it's good stuff for them, right? It makes them rich, but it kind of makes them lazy because they don't they just use slaves for the most part, They don't have tons of men and stuff like that. So Spain actually gets weaker during this time, especially with the rising power in England and France as they not necessarily industrialize, but just get more manufacturers and stuff like that. Also, I'm pretty sure we're in the Enlightenment now. We're starting to anyway. Yeah, 1550 to 1648, starting the Enlightenment. Scientific Revolution is first, actually. Art passed through two phases: Mannerism and the Baroque. Literature found a new form as drama became popular. So Shakespeare, probably. Um, Mannerism is messed up Renaissance principles like perspective to convey a message or emphasize a theme. So they use anxiety from war and economic upheavals to deliberately portray people in scenes that reflect anxiety and a desire to escape reality. The most famous Mannerist painter was El Greco, the Greek. Um, that's all they call him. Mannerism was replaced by the Baroque style, Barocco, I don't know. Both of these art styles originated in the Italian states, but expanded. Um, Baroque was like passionate and mystery, and Renaissance emphasis. Oh, never mind. It's associated with the Counter Reformation, glorifying the Catholic Church and the monarchy. The first great Baroque painter was the Italian trained Peter Paul Rubens, who lived in the Spanish Netherlands. A less well known painter was Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the few female painters of the age. Um, the most famous Baroque architect and sculptor of all was Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who completed St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, finally, and designed the designs shit, whatever. I really do not care about art. Shakespeare. It's kind of important. What else? Oh, scientific revolution. Here we go. So empirical evidence become more important instead of just philosophical stuff. So for the most part, before it was a lot of philosophy. It's like if this is true, then this, and that's what like based off of the Greek stuff. But then we finally get to hey, let's look at stars and shit. Let's fucking prove shit, right? With Nicholas Copernicus, which is actually he was wrong about a lot of stuff, so it's not actually a big deal that he was made fun of, which is what we talked about in class and stuff. And he based his stuff off of Islamic scholars because, like we said in the last thing, that a lot of stuff was saved by them. And holy shit, look at Ottoman 1600. Jesus Christ, they're spooky shits. Galileo was actually mostly right. Galileo Galilei. There's other ones like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler, who developed a comprehensive theory that showed the Earth and other planets did not revolve around the Sun in circular orbits. In circular orbits, that they actually revolve around in elliptical orbits, in ovals, which is true. Protestants insulted. It wasn't just Catholics that were against them; it was also Protestants. But eventually, they accepted it. Galileo is in 1609, so very soon after, discovered that the Milky Way is a huge collection of stars, and that Earth is not the only planet with moons. So you looked at Jupiter, it was all like Jupiter's got moons, Saturn's got moons, holy shit, stuff like that. The Structure of the Human Body in 1543 was published by Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius body, I don't know, those stick to me. But he like did a bunch of dissections and stuff of human bodies that were dead criminals. I'm pretty sure. More stuff on that. Vesalius. More of that was done, produced by William Harvey on the movement on the heart, movement on the movement of the heart and blood, 1628. So stuff about the blood stuff. Then Rene Descartes and Francis Bacon. France is Bacon. France is Bacon. they started doing stuff with deductive thinking and inductive thinking, and really doing this whole scientific method and empirical method and whole proving science with evidence. And that once you have a truth, you can find more truths by experimenting. Um, so both of them are pretty important with that. Uh, Also, mind and matter were different, which is kind of true. Which is like you perceive things differently from how they actually are. This is the idea of Cartesian dualism. Allowed the human mind to be detached from the world and yet at the same time objectively analyze the world. Uh, so presume that inherent in the mind are mathematical principles, a law of cause and effect, ideas that exist independently of human experience with the external world. Descartes supported this, and he wasn't an atheist. But he reduced God to the role of guarantor of knowledge. Um, People fear that the Descartes system encouraged atheism, so a lot of his books were banned and forbidden by most Protestant theologians. So Descartes left France to live in the more tolerant Netherlands, which is funny because they were Calvinists. It's like weird. Uh, Science and religion were mostly in conflict. The Royal Society in England was a thing. The Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge in 1660. And this is most known for like sponsoring like expeditions and stuff, but it was basically a place that where like a bunch of people would like gather, a bunch of scientists and like rich 2020 people would gather and just talk about science with each other, and share their discoveries and stuff like that. It was founded by the chemist Robert Boyle and 11 others, and they were based on the writings of Francis Bacon. Eventually, Louis XIV in 1666, so actually only 6 years after, Louis founded the French Royal Academy of Sciences, and similar organizations were established in Naples and Berlin by 1700. So just remember the Royal Society of London. Um, and the way I know about it is because of I read 8 Weeks in the Balloon by Jules Verne. You know, the guy that does 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and all those. So he writes later on, I think 1800s or something. It's kind of romantic, and it like he writes about all these expeditions into the great unknown, into the center of Africa and stuff like that, and how wondrous the white man's discoveries are and stuff like that. Um, yeah. By the way, if you have any questions, just ask. If you have anything I need to talk about or anything I'm skipping, go ahead. Um, I could try to text the answer first, or you can just wait for the delay. I don't really know. So what's the next thing I want to go over? Um, I guess absolutism is the next section. So this is about midway through, and this is a part that I really pay attention to because I think it's pretty interesting. So Louis XIV is really the guy who's known for absolutism, and we went over him forever, remember? But he basically centralized power, kept everyone in check, right? And this is because before, the towns want power, the merchants, right? Nobles want a lot of power, and the clergy also wants power. And he curtailed all of those. The towns weren't that much of a problem in France, um, but the nobles were, and so he made them, have to do the whole elaborate court system and stuff like that, and make them basically their way of gaining power and prestige, right, was not getting more land and being able to make their own laws and political power like that, but it was, the power to like hold a shirt, being close to the king and stuff like that. And because he made them be silly, they couldn't concentrate on other stuff that was more important to them. And then the merchants, he sold political titles, another way to decrease the power of nobles because he made merchants as nobles essentially and he got money that way, and so they were indebted to him. And the clergy, he became basically more powerful than the Pope, in France at least. Um, I'm not sure exactly what he did, but he basically like threatened them in a way or something like that. He said that he had the divine right to rule, right? Uh, Stuff like that. Before Louis the 14th, before him was Cardinal Richelieu. Realpolitik. He's the guy who basically orchestrated the 30 Years' War. Because Louis the 14th's mom was like just a shitty ruler overall. So actually, okay, Louis the 13th, um, he was kind of sucky, but he wasn't like awful. So Cardinal Richelieu basically ruled and did everything, and then Louis the 13th died, and Richelieu wasn't that important anymore. And then Louis the 13th's wife was shitty as hell. Like she just couldn't do anything, so she just let Mazarin rule. And Cardinal Mazarin, wasn't that good at all. And his suckiness led to the Fronde, right? You know about that. And Louis was like, "Oh shit, this sucks." Whatever, you know that. Um, Louis the 14th was also pretty good because he made economics better. Not he was pretty bad himself. His absolutism actually made economy not that good, but the king named John Baptiste Colbert. I just remember because John Colbert Report, whatever. He rigorously applied the benefits of mercantilism to France. It was like a command economy, where France was in charge of commercial activities. Um, and mercantilism, finite sum, gold is the only measurement of wealth, blah blah blah. He creates Versailles, which is really expensive, but it's worth it because he's very, very powerful. He revokes the Edict of Nantes, right, which was done way earlier to allow Huguenots to live in France. He says, "Fuck you, you can't live here anymore. Fuck your shit," and he just like kicks over the church and stuff like that. And he does this because now everyone is Catholic, and he's in charge of Catholics, so he's in charge of everyone, essentially. He considered religious unity necessary for realizing his goal of one king, one law, one faith. Um, his finance minister, Jean Baptiste Colbert, advised the king to be financially prudent and not waste money, but his military advisor, the Marquis of Louvois, warned that France was geographically vulnerable to outside attack. Pretty true. Um, Whereas Colbert believed that the government should give priority to increasing France's wealth, Louvois emphasized the army as a foundation of French power. So there was a debate within France over whether to have more wealth or more army. Louis tried to balance these two goals, but military readiness often came with a high price tag, making the twin goals contradictory. Um, on his deathbed, Louis would say, "I have gone to war too lightly and pursued it for vanity's sake." Whether or not Louis actually said this, he clearly believed that the successful monarch must be a military commander. So this is where he had, that picture of him that was really fancy and stuff. Yeah. What else? There's a war of devolution. The balance of power with the countries of Europe. He was trying to keep that there. The War of Devolution was a threat of Spanish power on French frontiers. To establish French dominance, he invaded the Spanish Netherlands. This is 1677 to 1678, so let's go forward to that bit. So you can see the light here. Basically to secure his borders. Then the Dutch War, which was when the Netherlands was expanding a little bit. The War of Devolution wasn't that powerful. Well, not much happened. It was like a very slight victory for him, but like barely. As you can see, it's just like a sliver of land here. Louis was trying to break the alliances of England, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic. So these three countries were allied to each other, and he wanted to break that so he could tear them each down individually. So that's when the Dutch War happened, which the Dutch were losing, but then they flooded the whole area and flooded their army, basically, and made it impossible for French armies to move against them by creating an artificial river. and German and Austrian forces joined the Dutch against the French and English, who were on the same side at some point. Which, so 1478, they won some more bits of the Netherlands, but like the Dutch were still pretty powerful. The 9 Years' War, which is also known as, actually, when the hell is this 9 Years' War? 9 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, I think. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, 7 Years' War is way later. Might be. Right, right. Okay. 9 Years' War is completely different from what I was thinking of. I'm sorry. It was in 1688 to 97. So this is when William of Orange becomes the King of England. So the Dutch and England are now sort of related. Um, not much happened. It was a big war, but like not much happened at all. It was a grand alliance of European states formed to defeat France. It was the League of Augsburg, which is England, Spain, Sweden, uh, the Dutch Republic, and the Austrian Emperor, as well as various. So basically every big power against France. Gee, I wonder when that will happen again. Napoleon. So the last big war that Louis was involved with was the War of the Spanish Succession. So let's see. There was a really terrible king in Spain. Like he was apparently when he died. I think it's his name is what, Charles II. Yeah, he was a Spanish Habsburg, right? Habsburgs were already inbred. Spanish Habsburgs even more inbred, and he was his both of his parents were already inbred. So like hugely like horribly inbred. Apparently when he died, his head was filled with water and his testicles were swollen and black and stuff like that. So basically, like he couldn't do anything. He was a sick dude. And so Louis was asking when he was gonna die over and over because when he was gonna die, he wanted to take the throne. I think. Hold on. Louis wanted to put his relative Philip of Anjou um, onto the throne. But he was actually third in line, so it was kind of a dick move because there's two other people who should be king before Philip of Anjou is. So it's kind of bullshit. So Leopold the First, the Holy Roman Empire at this time, which was kind of important, but not. It wasn't. It had already peaked before. Um, so they started the war. So Louis's relative would become the Spanish king, but it didn't work out. And there's another great alliance, 1700, formed against him. And the war ended with the Peace of Utrecht in 1713 and the Treaty of Baden and Rastatt, which is basically France making peace with different countries. So, the peace settlement did recognize Philip of Anjou as King Philip V of Spain, right? So, France basically won the throne. But, there was I don't want to call this. But even though they won that, it was a compromise where none of his successors or he could claim the French throne. So it basically meant that France's relative will be king of Spain, but they'll never be united, right? The treaty. What basically what it said is that uh, Philip will become king, but he and his successors will not have France, and vice versa. So keeping them separate, keeping the balance of power, and not having this stupid French-Spain alliance take over the rest of the world because that would be bullshit. The Habsburgs did not win. They didn't. The Habsburgs were out of the control of Spain. But they were compensated with the acquisition of the Spanish Netherlands. So Yeah, so as you can see here, blue. Oh, what the fuck? You're seriously gonna use two blues for Austria and France, whatever. So this is actually Austrian now, and a couple other places were given to like Naples. Basically, all the bits that Charles V had way long ago that was technically under Spain, but he was over them. They gave, they took Spain away from Austria and gave the rest straight to Austria, essentially in a way. Um, on the other end, Russia is now being more important with Peter the Great. This is a time period where he starts actually doing shit, and they start to modernize. And Peter the Great goes around and he starts paying attention. He's like, "Hey, let's build a dock. Let's do this. Let's do that, and let's make it illegal to have beards and stuff like that." Which is fine, I guess. I don't know if it's what I would have done, but like whatever. Um, Leopold the First it was the Holy Roman Empire emperor for a while, which was basically the nemesis to Louis, is what it says in this book anyway. And he tried to emulate Louis and do absolutism, but he's a Holy Roman emperor, so it's kind of hard to actually successfully do that because they're so independent, all those states. And he tried to reestablish Catholicism, which kind of worked. With the church did support him, but and all the favored nobility were Catholic, but like they didn't get rid of Protestantism. Um, let's see. They took back Hungary from the Ottomans, which, if you remember, just 100 years ago was like all this. See, they took that back over time. It says Hungary had been the chief battle zone between Austria and the Ottoman Empire for almost 150 years. And then they revolted as well, but it didn't work. All right, and other lands. All right, let's zoom in here. Let's talk about Prussia, the fake Russia, that is neither Russian nor P and whatever. The Hohenzollerns, Hohenzollerns or whatever. They're the ones that are important, right? It was originally Brandenburg, which doesn't show up here for whatever reason. Which it was one of these states. Here we go, Brandenburg. Um, so these were actually part of the Holy Roman Empire. All of this highlighted is still the Holy Roman Emperor, okay? But like these are still tiny states. It's like not worth putting them on the map. Brandenburg is a pretty big one. The Hohenzollerns with Frederick William of Hohenzollern, the Great Elector, and they eventually form Brandenburg Prussia, which eventually just becomes Prussia. The Peace of Westphalia, which I don't even remember what that is. I'm gonna watch the 30 Years' War video. Granted Frederick William of Hohenzollern, the Great Elector, control of East Pomerania and lands on the west bank of the Elbe. All of these things that I just talked about are happening at the same time. This is all in the late 1600s, okay? So the same time that Louis is doing this in Spain, the Brandenburgs there become a thing, okay? And their thing is, so they're nobles. A lot of nobles in Europe, they all have different names depending on the country, right? And they all have like different dyes and stuff like that. But basically, the nobles in Brandenburg are called the Junkers, okay? Uh, the ones in Russia are called Cossacks. They also have normal nobles, but also Cossacks. France, I don't remember what they're called. Spain, I don't know what they're called. England, I don't know what they're called. But my point is that they have their own regional names, more or less. And Junkers are just their nobles. That's all it is. Uh, so, Brandenburg in Prussia is basically ruled by a bunch of Frederick Williams. So it's Frederick William of Hohenzollern, the Great Elector, then Frederick William the First, which is he's actually the second, but whatever. He's the first king of Prussia. Then Frederick the Second, also called Frederick the Great. Um, he moves his force into Silesia, which is one over here. Expands a bit. This is in early 1700s. Let's go forward a bit. So now they're Prussia. Expand a little bit. See, they're divided, but they're still part of the same thing. It's weird. They're slowly expanding, conquering their neighbors and stuff like that. Almost doubling their population just with the addition of Silesia in 1740. which is not shown here. Here we go. This is Silesia, right here. So Russia is also very powerful now. We're now at 1750, which is a pretty round point. It's used in reference to a lot of stuff. So this is when the 7 Years' War is about to happen. And all through this is when the Enlightenment's happening. You know all about that with people like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes actually happened earlier, stuff like that. Peter the Great, you know what he's doing. So he wanted to create a window to the west, St. Petersburg, because he wanted a warm water port over here. He wanted to become like the West. He wanted to become absolutely powerful like them. Oh yeah, the nobles in Russia are called the boyars, as well as they also have Cossacks. They started under Ivan, but Peter the Great really did tons of shit, and he's a Romanov. So they did military reforms, drafting peasants to serve as professional soldiers, and increasing pay, Western technology, making new ships on St. Petersburg, social reform to make them more like Western Europeans. The important one that for some reason comes up all the time, it's really annoying, the table of ranks. Alright, I'm just going to read out this whole section. Bureaucratic reform. In order to pay for and promote his expanded army, new navy, and improved infrastructure, Peter reorganized the bureaucracy to more efficiently gather taxes and encourage industrial production. He replaced boyars with government officials selected according to his newly established table of ranks, which allowed officials to attain government positions based on merit, not on aristocratic status. He eliminated many titles of nobility and he ensured that the new bureaucrats were loyal to him as a person responsible for their newly acquired positions. So basically, he makes it so if you're in the government, you're there because you work good and because he wanted you there, not because you were born to do whatever. Okay, that's Russia. As an alternative to absolutism, there's also constitutionalism in England, for example, which is freer, I guess. There's parliaments and stuff like that. Sweden is also more or less that. The only important Swedish king is Gustavus Adolphus II. He's the guy who does stuff in the 30 Years' War. If you watch the video, you'll know. Who's the father of modern warfare, stuff like that. Other stuff happens, but not that important. Apparently, the nobles created the Riksdag, a structure modeled on England's parliament, composed of nobility rather than gentry. England has constitutionalism. Netherlands is a republic as well, so they're constitutional as well. Poland, Lithuania, which is such a shitty name. Like, I pick one or the other. Looking at you, Austro-Hungary isn't that bad because they have the O, but Poland and Lithuania is just two countries put together. Like, they were literally whatever. But they kind of suck because the nobles, it's a weak king and a bunch of nobles. The nobles elect the king from themselves, right? So it's a noble democracy or golden freedom. The king's reduced power and the nobility controlled legislator called the Sejm. Its constitution protected religious minorities, and for a time, Poland was one of the most diverse, tolerant societies in Europe. However, the system was undermined by the absolute veto power granted to each of the major nobles, who often exercised their veto, resulting in a frequently deadlocked parliamentary government. So, they just, not much happened, and this is actually where the Cossacks are important. In Ukraine, disaffected peasants and lesser nobility joined the Cossacks, nomadic farmer warriors who had long been tolerated because they served as a military buffer against the Ottomans to the south. This is 1648, about 100 years before. And for the most part, they're not able to organize to fight off the great powers around them. And they have big powers around them, right? They've got Austria to the southwest, Ottoman Empire, the gigantic fucking bastards that they are, to the south, Russia to their east, alright? To the north, they've got a giant Sweden, okay? And then, in a little bit, we'll get Prussia, right? Which is also pretty powerful in the northwest. And we'll see, in the next century or whatever, they get completely divided up, see? You skip forward to 1850, and they're completely gone. Actually, what year are they gone? They start getting their bites taken out of by Prussia, Austria, and Russia, who all expand at the same time into it. Working, yeah, it's gone by 1800 entirely, divided among its neighbors. So they're pretty weak. Um, in the Netherlands, the person in charge is called the stadholder, and their nobles are called the burghers, which are Burghers. They're ruled by a bunch of Williams: William of Orange, William II, William III. These are the stadholders. Treaty of Westphalia is what officially recognizes Dutch independence from Spain. Uh, let's see. Then England altered Dutch history. Oliver Cromwell took control of England. This was before the Glorious Revolution and all that. They did the Navigation Act, and this is really when they start. Well, this is when they just start beginning pissing off Americans with the Navigation Act, but it doesn't really do anything for like 100 years. Um, William III of the House of Orange, William of Orange, inspired the Dutch to rally together through a war, and they voted to make the position of stadtholder hereditary in the House of Orange rather than making an election. So they increased absolutism essentially. And he was eventually actually asked to be King of England in 1689. This is after Cromwell was like super shitty for a really long time. And this was British attempts to establish an effective constitutionalism. Um, so in England, finally, really actually looking at England, um, they had already started with in constitutionalism way back in the 12th century with the Magna Carta, a document that recognized some key rights of nobles to check the king's authority. So they already had a history of writing papers to check king authority. Um, so they created a parliament. They already had a parliament, which is a House of Lords for the nobility and House of Commons for the gentry, merchants, and wealthy townspeople. After Parliament condemned King Charles, the older bad one, for treason and sent him to die, England was declared a republic called the Commonwealth, which is when Cromwell was in charge. And they called it the Protectorate. The rule of Cromwell from 1653 to 1658 was a military dictatorship. It was not actually a republic or whatever. He was from the gentry class. He sat in the Long Parliament, achieved fame, and created a new model army, which is the army is like modernized. He was called the Lord Protector, but he protected the rights of Protestants, but he considered Irish Catholicism to be sedition, and he just hates Catholics. So it's called his rule is called the interregnum period, or the time between kings. It just means time between kings. So he wasn't actually that important. He was kind of an asshole. He forbade sporting events, made people not have fun, and it ended when he died in 1658. So in 1660, the restoration of the monarchy, when Charles II, the eldest son of the beheaded Charles I, was crowned king, but he also sucked. So they checked his power a lot, but he was not able to rule really well. He admired Louis XIV, but he wasn't able to do much. But then he decided to help Louis XIV in exchange for some money because he wanted more money to be able to do stuff because he didn't have money to do stuff, and Louis was going to pay him. But then the government found out, and so they killed him because that's a dick move. You betray your own country, right? Parliament passed the Test Act because they were afraid that he was going to promote Catholicism because Louis is Catholic, and that was what the influence was. They passed the Test Act, which required all office holders to take communion in the Anglican Church, making it impossible for Catholics to serve in the government or the military. The people who were against the kings were called the Whigs, and the people who supported a strong hereditary monarchy were called the Tories. The Whigs also pressed for tolerance to Protestants, and the Tories supported the restored ties between the kings and the Anglican Church. So none of them were Catholic. Tories were probably more likely to be Catholic, but they weren't either. Charles II died. They didn't kill him, but he died, and his brother became king, James II. But he was pro-Catholic and absolutist, so the Whigs didn't like him. And then he antagonized even the Tories by ignoring laws and being generally a dick. So they abandoned James, and they offered the throne to his grown daughter, Mary. This is a different Mary, apparently. I don't even know which one it is. And then Mary married to William of Orange, and they gave the throne to him, basically. They were co-rulers, William and Mary. Just trying to figure it out. It says William promised to use Dutch armies to invade England and take power from James. In return, Whig and Tory leaders offered the throne to William and Mary as co-rulers. Before they were crowned, they signed an agreement that guaranteed Parliament's full partnership in the constitutional government. So because of William of Orange's involvement, they became constitutional. In the Bill of Right, Mary and William agreed not to raise a standing army or not to raise taxes, not to levy taxes without Parliament's consent, and they agreed to call Parliament at least every 3 years, to guarantee free elections to the Parliament, and to not suspend laws. They created the Constitution, and this was called the Glorious Revolution, and this is what John Locke loves. He thinks it's the best thing ever. He loves the Glorious Revolution. And it was good because, like, James II was overthrown and gave Toleration Act of 1689, so William and Mary, they did it. And Catholics rose in Ireland to defend James II, but William and Mary kicked their asses. And that's the end of this chapter. And this is when we get into the 18th century. And we're going to go to, which is actually 1700s, which is when we're going to talk about Americas and stuff like that. And oh, cool. What? Wait. There we go. Yeah. I don't know if you guys are still here. It says 2 are watching, but I don't know who, and you guys haven't sent any messages, so. So let's just, I guess I'll look through the book. But, okay. This is just economics. I don't want to look at economics. It's boring. Cottage industries, the putting out system, early industrial revolution, so textiles start to be a thing, and this is with the water mills, stuff like that. Agricultural improvements. This guy named Jethro does something. I don't know. Just say inventions by Jethro. Jethro Tull is his name, but you don't have to write him. Just by Jethro if you want to write something, an essay. Interchangeable parts. Well, it says by the 1830s, large English textile mills were performing the entire process of transforming raw cotton into printed cloth. So there's a bunch of inventors. Eli Whitney, cotton gin, other ones that you're not going to remember unless you study it. James Watt devised a way to efficiently produce steam from coal for engines that had multiple uses. So just name a couple inventors if you gotta. global trade. The Dutch, they peak in the 17th century, but then they start declining. Um, and this is because that they had a shitty physical environment, a bunch of flooding all the time. They're the low countries because they're literally close to the sea. Uh, the Netherlands was weakened by wars with France because of Louis the 14th. He kept wanting to take it, and so they just kind of they just didn't grow, and while everyone else around them grew. So French and English merchants sought to take over the Netherlands trade, and basically just declined. Then this is when the British and French commercial empires rose. This is when you get the East India, West India, the India trading company that becomes important. You get Middle Passage and race and slavery going to the Americas now. Um, this is all for demographic changes, which is not actually that important, at least in my opinion. But during this time, this is when still Enlightenment. So you get stuff like people actually starting to bathe, and infanticide's not so much a problem, and health is improving, and stuff like that. It starts being not as shitty. Um, Romanticism starts to be a thing as well in the 1700s because of Rousseau, including a new style of art called Rococo, which is hilarious. It's called Rococo because it sounded like it was fancy, and that's what they called it that. It was originally derogatory, meaning shell work in French, but implying frivolous decoration. Rococo is like putting shells all over your house. But abandoned the majesty, power, and movement of Baroque, and instead emphasized grace and gentle action, emphasizing irregularity, asymmetry, and curvature on a much smaller, subtler scale. So they followed the wandering lines of natural objects like seashells and flowers, personal portraits and pastoral paintings, instead of heroic landscapes and grand ceremonial canvases. So it's like Romanticism, but like low key. There's not as much emotion in it. It's just like things that look nice. It's nice, I guess. Um, there's a ton of random specific people that I do not care at all about. Like, who the fuck is Eliza Haywood? Or Daniel Defoe? Oh, Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe. But still, not important at all. What else? Pop culture. They started Carnival, Carnival, whatever. Quakerism, Methodism, Protestant movements increased. Uh, Isaac Newton in the late 1700s, around this time, with the Principia Mathematica. There's a lot of nothing going on right now. Thomas Hobbes, right? We talked about the Prince. So the three things, the three big writers that are always mentioned in the Enlightenment, but there's more, but like specifically regarding government, John Locke, Rousseau, and Thomas Hobbes, they all emphasized the social contract. They disagreed on everything else, but they all agreed that people are creating a contract with the people in charge when they live in a country, right? When they create that government, they are creating a contract, right? Locke and Rousseau were the ones that talked about a constitution, about a written document, and Rousseau was more romantic, talking about they this should be a majority rule and stuff like that. And we take ideas from all of them. Thomas Hobbes. I mean, you guys know about this, and I know about this, so I'm not going to go over it. But just the documents that they do. Thomas Hobbes is the Leviathan. John Locke is the Second Treatise of Government. Rousseau is the Social Contract. Other people that are important in Enlightenment are Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, who basically writes that free market is better than mercantilism and that we should have free trade because it's better for everything. And then later Voltaire, which I don't even know what he does. I think he's just saying that we got to be absolutist. stuff like that. Yeah. It says perhaps the most important philosopher was Voltaire. Um, he liked English stuff. He was French, but he liked the way that English did their government. He published letters on the English, which praised the virtues of the English, and indirectly criticized the abuses of French society. Portrayed Britain as more rational than France. Uh, Popularized the thought of the great scientist Newton. So he really agreed with him, and he gave Voltaire a reputation as an important writer. He wrote his famous satire Candide, in which he attacked war and religious persecution, criticized aristocratic privilege and the power of clerics. He took special aim at the naivety of other philosophers with overly optimistic views of the human condition. So probably Rousseau. I don't know if they're at the same time, but he would have made fun of Rousseau. He believed that the centuries of abuse in European society could only be overturned by intense struggle, and as a result, he became involved in several well publicized legal cases that pitted individuals against the authority of the church. He wrote many political pamphlets urging reform. Other people, Denis Diderot. Diderot published the Encyclopedia, which took 25 years to do, and it's a big deal. Um, Montesquieu analyzed European political systems. He wrote the Persian Letters, which was like a fictional report by Persians coming to Europe and like making fun of Europe, which is pretty good. And saw slavery as an exception to despotism, and said that slavery is against natural law. But he like ridicules basically anyone in charge in Europe, including the Pope, including kings, stuff like that. He also wrote The Spirit of the Laws, which is some other thing. His Montesquieu's stuff was all about the separation of powers and checks and balances. All right, so this is what goes into the Constitution when we eventually do it. And this is actually read at this is 1740s. All right, so this is right before we start caring about independence. Montesquieu is checks and balances and separation of powers. Okay. Jacques Rousseau is the noble savage. He wrote Emile, which is a novel, and his main good thing is that we shouldn't beat children. We should be good to children, and that that we should have a social contract and the general will, stuff like that. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations in 1776. This is the year of independence. 1776 is when he does it. Okay. And he believed that the economy is run by the invisible hand, that we should be laissez-faire, hands off. While the Enlightenment people didn't really like the church and they were more for toleration. Women, we have people like Mary Wollstonecraft, who is viewed as the founder of modern Western feminism. Rachel. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. Again, Mary Wollstonecraft, Vindication of the Rights of Women. She identified two contradictions in the views of Enlightenment thinkers towards women. And she compared, she basically just said, like, pointed out the flaws in Enlightenment thinking regarding women, saying that, like, you view a king, you say that a monarch's power over a subject is arbitrary, but it's proper for a woman to obey a man. That's contradictory, and the subjection of a woman to a man is just as wrong as a slave owner's power over a slave, which it depends on how bad it was at the time. I mean, I can't. It's yeah, it was pretty controversial at the time. I mean, okay, I'm about halfway through the book, so I think I'm gonna actually cut it off for now. I'm gonna find the place with about the. Well, okay, you know all about the fucking um American Revolution, so I don't have to go over that. But yeah, I'm starting to get sore from being up, so like I'm gonna go to sleep. I'll finish it tomorrow if you guys still want to. Although at this point you might as well just yourself probably. I don't even know how helpful this is. Um, but yeah, because this is pretty. I'm going all over the place. This isn't one wasn't prepared against it ahead of time. I'm really just looking at the book, so I don't know. Yeah. So I'm gonna sign off. Um, maybe do this tomorrow. Maybe not. Sleep is more important. So yeah. Good night then.